The morning sun cast long shadows across the military academy courtyard as Sarah Mitchell walked toward the dining hall. Her steps were measured and confident, the result of 18 months of rigorous training that had transformed her from a small-town girl into a disciplined cadet. The crisp autumn air carried the familiar sounds of military life, boots marching in formation, drill sergeants calling out commands, and the distant hum of helicopters overhead. Sarah had always dreamed of serving her country. Growing up in rural Montana, she watched her grandfather's war medals gleam on the mantelpiece and listened to his stories of courage under fire. Her decision to join the military academy hadn't surprised her family, but it had certainly raised eyebrows among her classmates. In a program where women made up only 15% of the student body, Sarah knew she would face challenges that her male counterparts would never encounter. The academy was known for its strict traditions and unwavering standards. Every cadet was expected to maintain perfect uniform appearance, achieve high academic marks, and demonstrate leadership potential. Sarah had excelled in all areas, earning respect from instructors and peers alike. Her tactical analysis papers consistently received top marks. Her physical fitness scores ranked in the upper 10%, and her leadership evaluations praised her ability to remain calm under pressure. As she entered the dining hall, Sarah noticed the usual morning bustle. Hundreds of cadets moved through the serving lines with military precision, their conversations a low murmur beneath the clatter of trays and utensils. She grabbed a tray and joined her usual group, a diverse mix of cadets from various backgrounds who had bonded over shared struggles and mutual support. "Mitchell, you ready for the field exercise next week?" asked Marcus Thompson, a cadet from Texas whose easy smile masked a sharp tactical mind. The upcoming exercise would test everything they had learned about combat operations, requiring teams to work together under simulated battlefield conditions. "More than ready," Sarah replied, settling into her seat with a plate of eggs and toast. "I've been studying the terrain maps, and I think I've identified some strategic advantages that others might miss." The conversation flowed naturally as the group discussed their preparations. Sarah's insights into military strategy often surprised her peers, who had learned not to underestimate the quiet determination behind her steady gaze. She had a gift for seeing patterns that others missed, for finding solutions when conventional approaches failed. However, not everyone appreciated Sarah's capabilities. At a nearby table, a group of male cadets watched her with barely concealed resentment. Led by Robert Hayes, the son of a career military officer who expected to follow in his father's footsteps, they viewed Sarah's success as a threat to their own ambitions. Hayes had grown up believing that military leadership was his birthright, and the presence of women in combat roles challenged everything he thought he knew about the natural order. "Look at her," Hayes muttered to his companions, his voice low but audible enough for nearby tables to hear. "Acting like she belongs here, like she's one of us. This isn't a place for playing soldier." His words carried the weight of centuries-old prejudices, attitudes that the military had been working to change, but that still lingered in dark corners. Some cadets shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the toxicity in his tone, while others nodded in agreement. The divide wasn't absolute. There were male cadets who fully supported their female colleagues, but the tension was always present, simmering beneath the surface of daily interactions. Sarah heard the comment, but chose not to respond. She had learned early in her academy career that engaging with every slight would exhaust her energy and distract from her goals. Instead, she focused on her breakfast and the meaningful conversation with her friends. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. She knew that her performance would speak louder than any words she could offer in her defense. The meal concluded with the familiar rhythm of military routine. Cadets cleared their trays, formed orderly lines, and dispersed to their morning classes. Sarah's first period was advanced military history, where she would analyze famous battles and extract lessons for modern warfare. The professor, Colonel Williams, was known for his demanding standards and his ability to connect historical events to contemporary challenges. As Sarah walked across campus, she reflected on her journey to this point. The path hadn't been easy. She had faced skepticism from some instructors, subtle exclusion from certain social groups, and constant pressure to prove that she deserved her place. But she had also found allies, mentors who recognized her potential, and peers who judged her by her character rather than her gender. The academy's brick buildings stood like monuments to military tradition, their ivy-covered walls holding decades of history. Sarah felt the weight of that history, but she also felt the responsibility to help shape its future. She wasn't just fighting for her own success. She was part of a generation that would determine whether the military could truly become an institution where merit mattered more than prejudice. In her backpack, Sarah carried a letter from her grandfather that she read whenever doubt crept into her thoughts. Written in his careful handwriting, it reminded her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do what was right despite that fear. He had faced his own challenges as a young soldier, and he understood that each generation must fight its own battles for progress and justice. The morning classes passed in their usual blur of lectures, note-taking, and discussions. Sarah participated actively, her comments often adding new perspectives to complex topics. Her professors had come to rely on her thoughtful contributions, and several had already identified her as officer material. But success in the classroom was only part of the equation. The real test would come in the field exercises, where theory would meet reality and leadership potential would be measured under pressure. As the lunch hour approached, Sarah felt optimistic about the day ahead. She had no way of knowing that events were already in motion that would challenge everything she believed about fairness, justice, and the institution she had devoted her life to serving. The afternoon would bring revelations that would test her resolve and force her to confront the ugly reality that prejudice could flourish even in places dedicated to honor and integrity. The seeds of conflict had been planted months earlier, in conversations whispered behind closed doors and resentments allowed to fester in the shadows. Some cadets, and even a few instructors, had decided that Sarah's success was unacceptable, that her presence threatened the traditional culture they were determined to preserve. They had been planning their response, waiting for the right moment to send a message that would put her in what they considered her proper place. That moment was about to arrive, and Sarah would soon discover that her greatest test wouldn't come from enemy forces or challenging academic material. It would come from within her own ranks, from people who had sworn the same oath of service but who interpreted that oath very differently. The confrontation would reveal character, expose true loyalties, and ultimately demonstrate that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against foreign enemies, but against the prejudices that threaten to corrupt institutions from within. The afternoon tactical exercise had gone better than expected. Sarah's squad successfully completed their mission objectives while maintaining excellent communication and teamwork. As she walked back to the dormitory complex, she felt the satisfaction that came from a job well done. Her uniform was dusty from crawling through simulated combat scenarios, but her spirit was high. The other squad members had openly praised her leadership during the debriefing session, acknowledging how her quick thinking had saved them valuable time. Inside the dormitory, Sarah headed straight for her room to shower and change before dinner. The hallways buzzed with the usual post-exercise energy as cadets shared stories of their performance and prepared for the evening meal. She nodded to familiar faces as she passed, exchanging brief comments about the day's activities. The sense of camaraderie was strong, built through shared challenges and mutual respect earned through hard work. Her roommate, Jennifer Park, was already at her desk studying when Sarah entered their small but efficiently organized room. Both women had learned to maximize their limited space, with everything in its designated place according to military standards. Their friendship had developed naturally over months of living together, built on shared goals and complementary personalities. "How did the exercise go?" Jennifer asked, looking up from her economics textbook. She was preparing for a test that would determine her placement in the Academy's business administration track. "Really well," Sarah replied, hanging her tactical gear on its designated hook. "The team worked perfectly together. I think we might actually get top marks for this one." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Raised voices and the sound of multiple footsteps suggested something unusual was happening. Both women exchanged glances, their military training making them automatically alert to any disruption in normal routine. The sounds grew closer, and Sarah could distinguish at least 6 different voices, all male. Mitchell. The shout came from just outside their door, followed by aggressive knocking. We know you're in there. Come out here now. Jennifer immediately stood up, her protective instincts activated. She moved toward the door, but Sarah placed a restraining hand on her arm. Something about the tone and timing felt wrong. This wasn't the usual banter between cadets or even a legitimate military summons. The anger in the voices suggested something far more personal and potentially dangerous. What do you want? Sarah called back, positioning herself strategically near the window while keeping her voice calm and controlled. Her training had taught her to assess threats methodically, and every instinct warned her that this situation was escalating beyond normal boundaries. You think you're better than everyone else. Hayes's voice was clearly identifiable among the group. Time someone taught you a lesson about respect and knowing your place. The door handle rattled as someone tested whether it was locked. Sarah was grateful for her habit of always securing their room, a precaution that now seemed prophetic. Through the thin walls, she could hear other cadets in nearby rooms, some opening their doors to investigate the disturbance, others deliberately staying out of what they recognized as a dangerous confrontation. I'm calling the resident advisor, Jennifer whispered, reaching for the emergency phone that connected directly to the duty officer. But before she could complete the call, the voices outside took on a more organized tone. Someone was giving directions, coordinating the group's actions with military precision turned toward harassment. Here's what's going to happen, Hayes continued, his voice now carrying the false authority of someone drunk on power. You're going to come out here, and we're going to have a conversation about attitudes and proper behavior. The kind of conversation that makes sure everyone understands their position. Sarah recognized the threat implicit in his words. This wasn't about a casual disagreement or even normal hazing. The carefully chosen language suggested premeditation, a planned action designed to humiliate and intimidate. She had heard stories from other military academies where similar incidents had escalated into serious assaults or psychological abuse disguised as tradition. The group outside had grown larger, with additional footsteps indicating that word was spreading through the dormitory. Some of the new arrivals seemed to be protesting, their voices raised in opposition to what was happening. Sarah caught fragments of arguments as some cadets tried to defuse the situation while others encouraged the aggressors. This is insane, someone argued. You can't just attack another cadet because you don't like her success. She needs to learn respect, came the angry response. Some people think they can just waltz in here and act like they own the place. Through her door's small window, Sarah could see a crowd had gathered. The hallway was packed with onlookers, some clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, others seemingly enjoying the spectacle. The sight reminded her of historical accounts she had read about public humiliations, where crowds gathered to watch individuals being degraded for the entertainment of others. Jennifer had managed to reach the resident advisor, but the phone call revealed that he was off duty and the backup authority was dealing with another incident across campus. The normal command structure that should have prevented this situation had somehow failed, leaving Sarah and Jennifer effectively isolated despite being surrounded by dozens of potential witnesses. They're planning something specific, Sarah realized aloud, her tactical training helping her analyze the situation. This isn't random harassment. They've coordinated timing, made sure authority figures are unavailable, and gathered an audience. Whatever they want to do, they want it to be public and memorable. The knocking became pounding, and someone began rattling the door handle more aggressively. The metal frame creaked under the pressure, and Sarah realized that the lock wouldn't hold indefinitely against a determined group. She needed to make a decision, continue hiding and hope help arrived, or face the confrontation on her own terms. I have to go out there, she told Jennifer, who immediately shook her head in protest. Absolutely not. We wait for help. This could get dangerous. But Sarah understood something that Jennifer didn't yet grasp. The longer this continued, the more the crowd would expect a resolution. If she remained hidden, the story would become about her cowardice rather than their aggression. The narrative would shift, and she would become the cadet who was too afraid to face her peers. In the military culture of the academy, that perception could be more damaging than any physical confrontation. I won't let them control the story, Sarah said firmly. If this is going to happen, It happens on my terms. She moved to the door, her heart racing but her mind clear. Years of training had prepared her for combat situations, but this felt different. The enemy wasn't a foreign force or a strategic challenge. It was prejudice and hatred wearing the uniform she had learned to respect. The betrayal felt personal in a way that conventional warfare never could. As she reached for the door handle, Sarah thought about her grandfather's words about courage. This wasn't the kind of battle he had described in his war stories, but it required the same fundamental choice: retreat in the face of injustice or stand firm despite overwhelming odds. She knew that whatever happened in the next few minutes would define not just her own future, but potentially influence how female cadets would be treated for years to come. The weight of that responsibility should have felt crushing, but instead it strengthened her resolve. She wasn't just Sarah Mitchell anymore. She was a symbol of progress, a representative of everyone who had been told they didn't belong. The door handle turned easily in her hand, and she prepared to face whatever waited on the other side. The door swung open to reveal a semicircle of hostile faces. Hayes stood at the center, flanked by 8 other male cadets whose expressions ranged from nervous excitement to determined aggression. Behind them, a larger crowd had gathered, with some cadets holding phones to record whatever was about to happen. The hallway felt charged with tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Well, Hayes said with a cruel smile. Finally, decided to show your face. We've been discussing your attitude problem, Mitchell. Seems like you've forgotten that some traditions are bigger than your personal ambitions. Sarah stepped fully into the hallway, her posture straight, and her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. What exactly do you think you're accomplishing here? This is harassment, and you know it. Harassment? Hayes laughed, a sound without humor. This is education. The kind that should have happened months ago when you first started acting like you were special. One of his companions stepped forward, holding a pair of electric hair clippers that hummed ominously in the confined space. The sight sent a chill through the watching crowd, as the true nature of their plan became clear. This wasn't just about verbal intimidation. They intended to physically humiliate her in a way that would mark her for weeks. You see, Hayes continued, his voice taking on the tone of a lecturer, military tradition has certain expectations, certain standards that shouldn't be compromised by social experiments. We're going to help you understand your position here. Several female cadets in the crowd gasped, finally, understanding what they were witnessing. A few started to push forward, but Hayes's supporters blocked their path. The corridor had become divided between those who supported what was happening and those who recognized it as a serious crime. This is assault, called out Marcus Thompson, Sarah's friend from breakfast that morning. You can't just attack someone because you disagree with military policy. Stay out of this, Thompson, Hayes snarled. Unless you want to learn the same lesson. The threat effectively silenced several potential defenders, revealing how thoroughly the aggressors had planned this confrontation. They had chosen their moment carefully, ensuring that authority figures were absent and that peer pressure would prevent effective intervention. The institutional protections that should have shielded Sarah had been systematically undermined. Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes watching her response. She understood that this moment would define not just her own future, but the experiences of every female cadet who came after her. If she submitted to their demands, it would signal that intimidation and violence were acceptable tools for maintaining traditional hierarchies. If she resisted, she risked serious physical harm with no guarantee that help would arrive in time. You want to talk about military tradition? Sarah said, her voice carrying across the silent hallway. Let's talk about honor, integrity, and service before self. Let's talk about protecting those who can't protect themselves, not attacking them. Hayes's face darkened at her words. You don't get to lecture us about military values. You're just a diversity hire, a box that needed checking. Real soldiers know their place. The words stung because they echoed doubts that Sarah had wrestled with throughout her academy career. Every achievement had been questioned, every promotion scrutinized for political motivations rather than merit. But she had also learned that excellence was the best response to prejudice, that her performance would ultimately speak louder than her critics. If you believe that, Sarah replied, then you've already failed as soldiers. The military serves all citizens, not just the ones who look like you. The confrontation had reached a critical point. Hayes gestured to his companions, and they began to move forward in a coordinated advance. The cadet with the clippers activated them again, the buzzing sound drawing gasps from observers who finally understood the full scope of what they were witnessing. At that moment, Jennifer burst from the room behind Sarah, phone in hand. "Security is on their way," she announced loudly. "This is being recorded and broadcast live to the administration. Everyone who participates will be identified." Her declaration caused visible uncertainty among Hayes' supporters. Several of them glanced toward the phones held by other spectators, suddenly aware that their actions were being documented. The modern reality of social media meant that this incident wouldn't stay contained within academy walls. It would spread across the internet within hours. But Hayes seemed beyond caring about consequences. His face showed the desperation of someone whose worldview was being challenged and who saw violence as the only way to restore his sense of order. "I don't care who's watching," he declared. "Some lessons need to be taught publicly." He lunged forward, reaching for Sarah's arm while gesturing for his companions to restrain her. The hallway erupted in chaos as some spectators tried to intervene while others scrambled to avoid the confrontation. Bodies pressed together in the confined space, and Sarah found herself struggling against multiple hands trying to hold her in place. The clippers moved toward her head as Hayes' plan reached its climax. Sarah could hear Jennifer shouting behind her, other cadets yelling protests or encouragement, and the general noise of a crowd witnessing something they would never forget. Time seemed to slow as she realized that institutional protection had failed, and she was facing the rawest form of prejudice disguised as tradition. Then, cutting through the chaos like a sword through silk, came a voice that transformed everything in an instant. "Attention!" The command rang out with unmistakable authority, delivered in the tone that only comes from decades of military command. Every cadet in the hallway instinctively snapped to attention, their bodies responding to conditioning that overrode conscious thought. Even Hayes and his supporters found themselves automatically straightening, the clippers falling silent as their holder's hand dropped to his side. Through the crowd came a figure that commanded immediate respect. General Patricia Rodriguez moved with the controlled power of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Her uniform was pristine, her bearing unmistakably that of a senior officer who had earned every decoration adorning her chest. Behind her walked two military police officers whose presence suggested this was no casual visit. The hallway fell into complete silence as the general surveyed the scene. Her dark eyes moved methodically from face to face, cataloging expressions and positions with the tactical awareness of someone who had commanded troops in actual combat. When her gaze finally settled on Sarah, something shifted in her expression, though her voice remained professionally neutral. "I seem to have arrived at an interesting moment," General Rodriguez said, her words carrying implications that made several cadets visibly pale. Perhaps someone would like to explain what educational activity was taking place here. No one spoke. The sudden appearance of ultimate authority had transformed the dynamic completely, revealing how dependent the aggressors had been on the absence of legitimate power. Hayes, who moments earlier had been commanding the situation, now stood frozen with his mouth slightly open, apparently unable to process how dramatically circumstances had changed. General Rodriguez's attention focused on the clippers, still buzzing quietly in the hands of one terrified cadet. "I see we have some creative interpretations of grooming standards being implemented. How resourceful." Her tone made it clear that resourceful was not a compliment. The moment stretched endlessly as Sarah realized that everything was about to change. But she had no way of knowing just how dramatically, or that the general's presence represented far more than routine intervention in a disciplinary matter. General Rodriguez stepped closer to the group, her presence filling the hallway with an authority that made everyone acutely aware of their position in the military hierarchy. Her eyes moved systematically across each face, and Sarah noticed that the general seemed to be memorizing details rather than simply observing. This wasn't casual attention. It was the focused assessment of someone gathering evidence. "Cadet Hayes," the general said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Step forward." Hayes moved with obvious reluctance, his earlier confidence evaporating under the weight of genuine military authority. The swagger that had characterized his behavior moments before was completely gone, replaced by the nervous energy of someone who suddenly understood they had miscalculated badly. "General Rodriguez, ma'am," Hayes stammered, attempting a salute that was slightly off regulation in his nervousness. There was a misunderstanding about proper conduct, and a misunderstanding," the general repeated, her tone suggesting she found the explanation inadequate. "Involving hair clippers, and what appears to be a coordinated group action against a single cadet. How educational." She turned her attention to the cadet still holding the clippers, who immediately tried to hide them behind his back as if they might somehow disappear. "Cadet Williams, bring those devices forward." Now, Williams stepped forward reluctantly, extending the clippers with a trembling hand. General Rodriguez examined them without touching, her expression growing colder with each second. Electric clippers, fully charged, clearly prepared for use. This suggests premeditation rather than spontaneous misunderstanding. The general's analysis was delivered with the precision of someone accustomed to dissecting complex situations under pressure. Sarah realized she was witnessing a master tactician at work, someone who could read terrain, assess threats, and develop strategy with remarkable speed. But there was something else in the general's manner, a personal intensity that suggested this incident had triggered more than professional concern. "Cadet Mitchell," General Rodriguez said, turning to face Sarah directly. "Are you injured?" "No, ma'am," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite everything that had happened. "They hadn't begun their intended action when you arrived." "Their intended action," the general repeated thoughtfully. "Would you care to elaborate on what you believe that action involved?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, aware that her next words would officially document what had occurred. Once spoken to a general officer, her account would become part of the formal record, with all the consequences that entailed. But she also understood that silence would protect the aggressors and potentially endanger future victims. "Based on their statements and the equipment they brought, ma'am, I believe they intended to forcibly cut my hair as a form of humiliation and intimidation." The general nodded slowly, as if Sarah's assessment confirmed her own conclusions. "I see. And what precipitated this educational initiative?" Hayes found his voice again, apparently hoping he could still control the narrative. "General, with respect, this cadet has shown consistent disrespect for military tradition and proper hierarchy. We felt that some guidance was necessary to help her understand appropriate behavior." "Appropriate behavior," General Rodriguez repeated, her voice dropping to a tone that made everyone in the hallway instinctively take a step back. "Cadet Hayes, in your assessment of appropriate behavior, does gang intimidation and physical assault play a significant role?" "Ma'am, we weren't going to hurt her. It was just meant to teach respect and proper attitude." The general's expression shifted subtly, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something that looked like personal anger beneath the professional composure. "Respect," she said quietly. "An interesting concept. Tell me, Cadet Hayes, what do you know about my background?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, and Hayes looked confused by the apparent change of subject. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand. My background, Cadet. My service record. My qualifications for wearing these stars." General Rodriguez gestured to the rank insignia on her shoulders. "Surely you researched the senior leadership of this institution before forming opinions about appropriate military behavior." Hayes looked increasingly uncomfortable as he realized he was walking into a trap he couldn't see. "Ma'am, I know you're a distinguished officer, but I'm not sure how that relates to this situation." "Then, allow me to educate you," the general said, her voice taking on the cadence of a formal briefing. "I am General Patricia Rodriguez, and I graduated from this academy 28 years ago. I was the third woman in academy history to be selected for the Special Operations track." A murmur ran through the crowd as cadets began to understand the significance of what they were hearing. Special Operations was the most elite program the academy offered, with acceptance rates below 5% and standards that eliminated most candidates regardless of gender. I served 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan, commanded a battalion in Iraq, and led the task force that rescued 18 hostages from terrorist control in Syria. I hold the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and the Purple Heart. Each achievement fell like a hammer blow, systematically destroying any argument that women couldn't excel in military service. Sarah felt a surge of pride not just in the general's accomplishments, but in what they represented for all female service members. I mention this, General Rodriguez continued, because I want to ensure that everyone present understands exactly who you were attacking when you decided to educate Cadet Mitchell about respect. The words hit Hayes like physical blows. His face went pale as the full implications became clear. He hadn't just attacked a fellow cadet. He had attacked a woman who would one day potentially outrank him, whose service record would dwarf his own, whose leadership capabilities were already being recognized by the Academy's senior staff. Furthermore, the general said, reaching into her uniform pocket, I have here a preliminary report on cadet rankings for this semester. Cadet Mitchell currently holds the second highest overall score in her class, including top marks in tactical analysis, leadership assessment, and peer evaluation. She held up the document so the crowd could see the official seal, making it clear this wasn't opinion but documented fact. Her performance places her in the top 2% of all cadets currently enrolled, with strong recommendations for advanced leadership training. The revelation sent shock waves through the assembled cadets. Many had been unaware of Sarah's academic standing, having been influenced by the whisper campaigns and rumors spread by her detractors. The official confirmation of her excellence made the attack appear even more petty and unjustified. So let me be absolutely clear about what occurred here today, General Rodriguez announced, her voice carrying across the now silent hallway. A group of male cadets, led by someone whose own academic performance places him in the bottom quarter of his class, decided to physically assault and humiliate a female cadet whose achievements exceed their own. Hayes tried to speak, but the general cut him off with a gesture. They coordinated this attack, brought implements to carry it out, and timed it to occur when normal authority structures were absent. This represents premeditated assault, conspiracy, and conduct unbecoming. The legal terminology made it clear that this was no longer a disciplinary matter, but a criminal investigation. Several of Hayes's supporters began backing away, suddenly, understanding that their participation had legal consequences beyond academic discipline. But here's what you really need to understand, General Rodriguez said, her voice carrying a weight that suggested she was about to reveal something even more significant, something that elevates this incident beyond common assault into a matter of national importance. General Rodriguez moved to the center of the hallway, positioning herself so that every cadet could see and hear her clearly. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant sounds of normal academy life continuing in other buildings. Sarah noticed that even the cadets who had been recording with their phones had stopped, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented. What elevates this incident, the general began, is not just the assault itself, but who was targeted and why. She paused, allowing the tension to build as she surveyed the faces around her. Cadet Mitchell, please step forward. Sarah moved to stand beside the general, her mind racing as she tried to understand what was about to be revealed. She felt exposed standing before the crowd that had just witnessed her near assault, but the general's presence provided a shield of protection she hadn't expected. 3 weeks ago, General Rodriguez announced, the Department of Defense completed its annual review of Academy cadets for special classification programs. These programs identify individuals with exceptional potential for roles critical to national security. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a folder marked with security classifications that made several cadets gasp in recognition. Documents with those markings were rarely seen outside of senior leadership offices, and their presence suggested this announcement carried weight far beyond normal academy business. Cadet Mitchell has been selected for the Strategic Leadership Development Program, a classified initiative that identifies future senior officers while they are still in training. This program has produced 12 generals, 34 colonels, and countless other senior leaders over the past 2 decades. The revelation hit the crowd like a physical wave. Sarah felt her knees weaken as the implications sank in. The Strategic Leadership Development Program was legendary within military circles, spoken of in whispers as the pathway to the highest levels of command. Selection was so rare and secretive that most officers completed entire careers without knowing anyone who had been chosen. Selection for this program, the general continued, is based on a combination of academic excellence, leadership potential, tactical innovation, and psychological assessment. Fewer than 5 cadets per year across all service academies receive this designation. Hayes stood frozen, his face reflecting the dawning realization that his actions had targeted someone whose future rank would likely exceed his own wildest ambitions. The woman he had sought to humiliate was already being groomed for responsibilities he would never be trusted with. But the significance goes beyond even these achievements, General Rodriguez said, her voice taking on a tone of profound seriousness. Cadet Mitchell's tactical analysis of the Kandahar situation, submitted as part of her coursework last month, has been forwarded to the Pentagon for review by active operational commanders. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She remembered the assignment, a complex analysis of urban warfare challenges in Afghanistan, but she had no idea it had attracted attention beyond her professor. The thought that her academic work was being reviewed by commanders in the field felt surreal. Her proposed modifications to current rules of engagement have already been implemented by 3 forward operating bases, with measurable improvements in both mission effectiveness and civilian protection. In other words, this cadet's ideas are currently saving lives in active combat zones. The hallway had become completely silent as cadets absorbed the magnitude of what they were hearing. Sarah realized that her grandfather's stories about courage under fire had taken on new meaning. She wasn't just studying military history, she was already contributing to it. General Rodriguez turned to face Hayes directly, her expression cold with controlled fury. So when you decided to organize this assault, Cadet Hayes, you weren't just attacking a fellow student. You were attacking an officer whose ideas are currently protecting American soldiers in combat, whose future leadership will shape military policy for decades. Hayes tried to speak, but no words came. His entire worldview had been shattered in the span of minutes. Everything he thought he knew about merit, tradition, and military hierarchy had been revealed as hollow prejudice masquerading as principle. The irony, the general continued, is that while you were planning to humiliate Cadet Mitchell for supposedly not understanding her place, you were demonstrating that you fundamentally misunderstand your own place in the military hierarchy. She gestured to the military police officers, who stepped forward with evident purpose. Cadet Hayes, you and your co-conspirators are under arrest for assault, conspiracy, conduct unbecoming, and violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You will be processed through the criminal justice system and face both military and civilian charges. The arrests began immediately, with Hayes and his supporters being formally detained and read their rights. The crowd of spectators watched in stunned silence as their peers were led away in handcuffs, their military careers effectively ending before they had truly begun. But General Rodriguez wasn't finished. She turned to address the remaining cadets, her voice carrying across the hallway with unmistakable authority. Let this serve as education for everyone present. The military has no tolerance for prejudice disguised as tradition, no patience for mediocrity that attacks excellence, and no place for those who cannot recognize merit regardless of its packaging. She faced Sarah again, her expression softening slightly. Cadet Mitchell, you handled this situation with remarkable composure under circumstances that would have challenged experienced officers. Your response demonstrates exactly why you were selected for advanced leadership development. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the rapid transformation of her circumstances. Hours earlier, she had been facing assault and humiliation with no apparent recourse. Now she stood beside a general who had revealed achievements she hadn't even known she had accomplished. "Ma'am," Sarah said, finding her voice despite the emotional intensity of the moment. "I had no idea about the program selection or the Pentagon review. I just tried to do my best work." "That's exactly why you were chosen," General Rodriguez replied. "Excellence isn't about seeking recognition. It's about maintaining standards regardless of circumstances. You've demonstrated that consistency since your first day here." The general addressed the assembled cadets one final time. "The military is changing, as it must to serve all Americans effectively. Those who adapt and embrace merit-based advancement will thrive. Those who cling to outdated prejudices will find themselves left behind by progress they cannot stop. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah realized that this incident would become legendary within Academy folklore. But instead of being remembered as the woman who was humiliated by her peers, she would be remembered as the cadet whose excellence was so undeniable that even her attackers had to confront their own inadequacy. Jennifer approached with tears in her eyes, pulling Sarah into a hug that conveyed everything words couldn't express. Around them, other cadets offered congratulations and apologies for not intervening more effectively. The social dynamics had shifted permanently, with Sarah's status elevated beyond question. General Rodriguez prepared to leave, but paused to offer final words of guidance. Cadet Mitchell, your path forward will continue to present challenges. Excellence always attracts criticism from those who cannot achieve it themselves. But remember that every barrier you break makes it easier for those who follow. As Sarah watched the general walk away, she thought about her grandfather's letter about courage. She understood now that courage wasn't just about facing enemy fire or completing dangerous missions. Sometimes it was about standing firm when your own institution failed you, maintaining dignity when others sought to strip it away, and continuing to excel despite those who wanted you to fail. The afternoon sun streamed through the hallway windows, casting long shadows that seemed symbolic of the transformation that had occurred. Sarah Mitchell walked back to her room knowing that her life had changed irrevocably, but confident that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had faced the worst that prejudice could offer and emerged not just unbroken but elevated, her path to senior leadership now clearer than ever before.